external actors such as NATO and regional partners are becoming increasingly vital. Just to quote the last week's European Council conclusions, the European Council underlines the importance of working together with the like-minded partners who share our foreign and security policy goals. It welcomes in that regard the EU's recent security and defense partnerships with the UK and Canada. In support of this goal, today's seminar aims to explore the strategic, political, and operational dimensions of EU security and defense partnerships. We are bringing together key stakeholders from EU institutions, think tanks, academia, and partner organizations to assess current frameworks, identify challenges, and propose pathways for enhanced cooperation. I would like to thank Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament, for her keynote addressing during this seminar. President Metsola will join us in 45 minutes. I also express my gratitude to the Polish presidency, under whose patronage this event is held, as I think the last one in the European Parliament. And in particular, I would like to thank Weronika Frydryszek, representative to the Political and Security Committee and Deputy Head of the Permanent Representation of Poland to the EU, for joining us today. I would like also to welcome Tomasz Husak, Senior Advisor to the Director General, DG DEFIS, and Mr. Husak was proposed to be our speaker by Commissioner Kubilius, who unfortunately was not able to come this morning. I would like also to thank Marcin Burzański, our Senior Advisor on EU Defense and Security, and Marcin will moderate our two panels. And also I would like to thank my colleagues in the SEDE Committee and EPP Group for co-hosting today's events with me. I sincerely thank you as well to the esteemed speakers and experts who have joined us today. I'm very glad we can benefit from your insights, research, and experience, and very look forward to the valuable contributions you will bring to our discussions. We are fortunate to have with us an outstanding group of experts, academics, policymakers, and practitioners whose perspectives will help shape our dialogue and guide the way forward. Over the course of our discussion, I encourage you to engage openly, share your insights and ideas. The goal of our meeting is to brainstorm and lay the groundwork for the upcoming European Parliament report on EU strategic defense and security partnerships, which I will speak about in the more detail later today. With that, let me once again welcome you and thank you for your participation. I now invite Weronika Frydryszek to deliver her remarks on behalf of the Polish presidency. Dear Weronika, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me on the very last day of the Polish presidency. It's a real pleasure to
Hours, I would say.
To address you at the expert seminar on EU strategic defense and security partnership. You know that our presidency has come at a crucial moment when Europe faces unprecedented challenges. The war of aggression at our doorstep, also the geopolitical landscape undergoing profound changes and shifts, and the stability of Europe, stability and security, but also the broader global order is at serious risk. And in this increasingly challenging security landscape, there is even a greater need for strategic cooperation with partners around the world. This was also, as you said, reflected in the recent European Council conclusions. Over the last 6 months, the Polish presidency has actively sought to strengthen ties with key like-minded partners, especially in the security and defense sector. Our presidency motto, Security Europe, has much broader reach than Europe only. The recently signed security and defense partnerships with the UK and Canada are testament to our strong cooperation. The EU and its security and defense partners play an important role in strengthening also our security and safeguarding the rules-based international order and tackling shared challenges and threats. The recent adoption of the SAFE instrument under the Polish presidency further underlines the significance of security and defense partnerships as a precondition for enhancing industrial cooperation with our like-minded partners. I'm convinced that concluding additional bilateral agreements with these partners in the context of SAFE instrument will bring substantial added value, benefiting our defense industries mutually by fostering technological advancement, improving availability of enhancing the competitiveness of our products. It will enable our partners to aggregate their demand with ours and procure together, benefiting from the economies of scale. I think it's also important to emphasize that this is not about competing with our partners by strengthening our defense industry, because this will also contribute to their security and deterrence. And this is also something that I heard exactly a couple of days ago from one of those partner countries, that they see this also as an investment in Europe's defense industry is also investment in their deterrence as our partners. As you know, the security and defense partnerships have been developed by the EU since the adoption of the strategic compass, and they foster structured, forward-looking frameworks and tailored dialogues in key areas of common security and defense policy, from peace building, civilian and military crisis management, maritime security, space, cyber, emerging disruptive technologies, hybrid threats, resilience, climate security nexus. So really there is a broad spectrum and broad potential. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the threats to Europe, it is evident that Russia will remain in the foreseeable future an existential threat, or the existential threat to the European security and a key adversary. And today's discussion comes also at an important moment of diplomatic efforts to secure full and unconditional ceasefire in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. However, we need to recognize that, first of all, Russia shows absolutely no interest in ending the war. And secondly, regardless of the outcome of those potential peace negotiations, much more is required to ensure just and lasting peace in Ukraine, but also security in Europe. So in order to reach this, we need to strengthen Ukraine militarily, politically, financially, and provide them with robust security guarantees. We must enhance our deterrence, defense preparedness, and resilience in a comprehensive way. And finally, we also must take steps to disable Russia's ability to rebuild, rebound, rearm, and harm Europe's security interests. And for all these tasks and challenges, we must collaborate closely with our partners. But of course, the challenges we face extend beyond Russia's aggression. Recent escalation in the Middle East has led to significant and varied risks for European and global security and stability. In the long term, China's rise as a global power may introduce new strategic complexities. It is therefore paramount that we maintain strong and unified transatlantic relations within NATO and with partners in the Indo-Pacific, such as Japan and the Republic of Korea. Ladies and gentlemen, Europeans must take more responsibility for our own security and do more to deter Russia. This message is becoming increasingly loud and clear recently. And a Europe capable of taking responsibility for its own security would be an attractive and reliable partner, not only to the United States. That's why Poland will also mobilize more EU funds to boost defense expenditure and the potential of our defense industry. We will encourage the engagement of non-EU allies in European defense projects and cooperation to ensure interoperability of our forces and equipment. European defense capabilities should be developed in strategic harmony with NATO. As we confront these evolving threats, it is crucial to act coherently. I thank you very much for your attention and wish you very fruitful and exciting discussions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Friedrichek. And now I would like to ask Tomasz Husak, Senior Advisor to the Director General DG DEFIS, to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everyone. First, I would like to congratulate the Polish presidency for the impressive work done on defense files, notably on the SAFE and EDIP. I think it's coming in a paramount time where Europe is confronting a paradigm shift. The Russian aggression and the resulting war rages at our borders. China is a global competitor, and the transatlantic relationship is evolving. Now is the moment to build our strategic autonomy and take greater responsibility for our own defense. As the NATO Secretary General has recently stated, we are not at war, but we are certainly not at peace either. Member states need to invest more and address critical capability gaps to build a credible deterrence and ensure peace. But simply increasing member states' defense spending is not enough. Fragmented procurement is a luxury we can no longer afford. It wastes taxpayer money and undermines our collective strength. We are building upon a solid foundation. Our past initiatives and instruments have already demonstrated tangible and impactful results. As President von der Leyen stated during the latest NATO Summit Defense Industry Forum, the Europe of defense has finally awakened. With the European Defence Fund, as well as instruments like ASAP and EDIRPA, we have contributed to the shaping of a new defense industrial culture in Europe, increasing cooperation among member states in a traditionally exclusive sovereign domain. With the White Paper for European Defence, Readiness 2030, and the ReArm Europe Plan, the Commission put forward its vision on how to ensure that member states will be ready to deter any military threat within the next 5 years while continuing to support Ukraine. These initiatives constitute a unified and strategic response to the evolving security challenges facing Europe. They are designed to enhance cooperation among member states, promote greater joint investments in cutting-edge defense capabilities, and expedite the modernization of national armed forces. At the same time, we are increasing our cooperation with partners. To date, the EU has signed 8 security and defense partnerships with United Kingdom and Canada just recently. Security and defense partnership agreements with the United Kingdom and Canada open the door for UK and Canada to be closely associated to member states' common procurement of defense capabilities under our SAFE instrument worth 150 billion euros in loans. With United Kingdom, there are a lot of topics covered. For example, on the defense industry, but also military mobility, peace building, crisis management, countering of hybrid threats, just to name a few. Future joint procurements will increase our readiness, will close military gaps that we have and will increase. That is of most importance, our interoperability when our armed forces are going on missions together. The EU and Canada have been working closely on this for years, both bilaterally and in NATO. Canada has been leading NATO's enhanced forward presence in Latvia since 2014, making Europe's eastern flank stronger and safer. Together, we will define where our cooperation can have the most value added and where we should channel joint investments, and it will be good for our industries, it will be good for our people, and it will be good for our transatlantic security. And of course, it will be good for our continued support to Ukraine, because the more we invest in the highly innovative Ukrainian industry, the more the industry will be capable and the better Ukraine can defend itself. And SAFE is not only open to our union's member states, UK and Canada, but also the future members like Ukraine and to our defense and security partners like Norway, Japan, or Republic of South Korea. We are also clarifying our rules for cross-border transfers of defense products and multinational industrial collaborations. This is the way to speed up and scale up, not in isolation, but together with our most trusted friends. In conclusion, these measures are not only necessary, they are essential to securing credible and effective European deterrence by 2030. They reinforce the EU's long-term support for Ukraine, strengthen our ability to protect citizens and values, and enable decisive action in a volatile world. The cost of inaction is high. The time to act is now, and the Commission stands ready to act with all its means. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Advisor Husak, and thank you for giving us the perspective of the EU Defense Commissioner and DG Defense Industry and Space. Now I would like to ask Marcin Burzański to moderate our first session, Landscape of Current and Future EU Defense and Security Partnerships, NATO and Bilateral. Marcin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for all the introductory remarks from our distinguished guest, Ambassador Friedryszak and Mr. Husak. I'll now move quickly, as we don't have that much time, to give the floor to Benedetta Berti, who is the Director of Policy Planning at the Office of the Secretary General at NATO. Of course, it's very easy and clear for everyone to understand that this is the fundamental bilateral, well, multilateral partnership for the EU, and we'd really like to hear, Benedetta, from you about the latest state of it and your observations, particularly after the NATO summit.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to engage this morning. My bottom line up front would be that the NATO 2025 summit in The Hague was not moment for the alliance, and one that opens opportunities to reinforce the strategic partnership between NATO and the European Union. So just to recall what we just agreed a few short days ago in The Hague, this was, I would say, the culmination of a process of strategic adaptation for NATO that really started in 2014, but accelerated after the beginning of Russia's war of aggression in 2022. And the purpose of this adaptation was to reset our deterrence and defense posture to be strong and credible in what is, and I fully concur with the prior speakers, the most complex, volatile, and risky security environment in generation, not just because of the Russian direct threat to Euro-Atlantic security, but because of the enduring threat of terrorism, permanent crises and instabilities in our neighborhood, the rising challenges posed by strategic competitors and adversaries through hybrid and other destabilizing campaigns, and of course, the broader shift in the global balance of power. So because of that, as was rightly said in the 2022 strategic concept, we recognize NATO is not, the Euro-Atlantic area is not at peace, and the alliance, NATO, needs to prepare for that much more complex security environment. Since then, as you know, many decisions have been taken, new concepts translated into military plans that ensure the territorial defense of Europe, then translated into precise capability targets to each and every ally that essentially match plans to capabilities and give us a strong deterrence and defense posture. Now in The Hague, what allies did was commit to resource for the long term, the strategic adaptation with that commitment to get to 5% of GDP in a decade. And as you know, that commitment is broken down into two main categories. We have a 3.5 core defense commitment. This is very much tied to our capability targets. So it's really tied to have those capabilities that are needed for the defense of Europe. And an additional 1.5 commitment that looks at the broader security-related expenses, essentially recognizing that we can have very strong armies, but they need to be backed by strong critical infrastructure and societies in order to deliver. And of course, an important recognition that support for Ukraine counts towards this 5% commitment. Again, recognizing that what we do for Ukraine is also in support of our security in the Euro-Atlantic area. I mentioned this key decision because I think on all aspects of the decision, there are opportunities to strengthen NATO-EU cooperation. That is true on the 3.5 commitment, and it's true on the 1.5 commitment. So very briefly, when it comes to the 3.5 commitment, so increasing defense spending to essentially, we would go back to our average Cold War days defense spending in terms of GDP per capita, and we equalize the contribution between European countries and the United States, making NATO not just stronger, but also fairer, and also giving European allies a much stronger role, particularly for the conventional defense of Europe. Now, here the key challenge is how do we spend it? How do we produce enough? And here there is a really clear case for stronger and continuous cooperation between NATO and the European Union. As you know very well, NATO sets standards, NATO sets capability requirements. We also have our own process to aggregate demand, but the European Union has the financial tools to scale and speed up that renaissance of our defense industrial base. And it's really important that we continue to cooperate closely so we can have a synergy between capabilities and requirements from NATO, but also the tools to develop and provide them from the European Union. From a NATO perspective, doing so in a way that really encourages cooperation, removes barriers to cooperation is important because we have a transatlantic defense base and we want to remain interoperable and operationally effective throughout the transatlantic defense industrial base. So that would be my point of view on the importance of removing transatlantic barriers to cooperation and really continuing to preserve the transatlantic industrial base. And I think this is one area where NATO-EU cooperation can deliver more and will need to deliver more to really operationalize the 3.5 commitment. I also think we have good examples of NATO-EU cooperation when it comes to capability development and delivery. We can look at the multi-role tanker transport fleet and the fact that we have developed collectively a capability that is critical for issues like air-to-air refueling, medical evacuation, strategic lift. These are critical shortfalls that we have, particularly as European allies, and this type of projects show that we can deliver together. And then very briefly on the 1.5% commitment to security-related expenses. Again, I think here NATO-EU cooperation will be incredibly important, whether it is working on critical infrastructure, transport infrastructure, energy grids, digital communication, civilian satellites. These are all critical enabler of our deterrence and defense posture, and one where the European Union has clear competencies and expertise to contribute to a more secure and safe critical infrastructure. And also areas such as military mobility have real value and are another area where we can really see the synergies between the two organizations. So I think whether it's to deliver the 3.5% commitment or the 1.5 commitment, NATO-EU cooperation will play a really key role to unleash that industrial renaissance that we really need. And finally, I also think we should continue to support Ukraine in parallel, but more and more also seeking synergies and cooperation, because support for Ukraine is important for the security of the Euro-Atlantic area. And I think that's all the time I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benedetta. And I know you will need to leave us, so let me just do a quick follow-up question to you. If you could name some key areas for improvement that you think we could work together to identify, and particularly in terms of mechanisms. And the second part, the big issue which I've heard raised several times was the question of intelligence sharing and collaboration. How do you see making progress in this area? Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. So I would say on the second point, we are making progress in terms of sharing information. Of course, we have our own distinct frameworks and those remain. And as long as they remain, we have rules of engagement. But I think at the staff-to-staff level, there's been incredible progress in really trying to systematically share what we can share and make cooperation and information sharing the norm rather than the exception. I think this needs to continue, particularly in the area of anything that has to do with supporting the defense industrial base and delivering on the capabilities that we need for deterrence and defense. Here, there is a clear case. It would make no sense I think, for us not to work together in lockstep, because we are really working towards the same goal and we have distinct but complementary tools in many aspects. So I see a lot of political will and also growing progress in really sharing information within, of course, our respective legal framework. So I think there is progress. I think we need to do more, especially when it comes to the capability targets and when it comes to understanding and identifying the critical shortfalls, particularly for European allies, that we need to prioritize for industrial development. So I would definitely say continuing and strengthening cooperation on defense industrial, so on supporting the defense industrial base would be for me a very key priority. I would also say as we continue this process, I would put, as I said in my intervention, the issue of critical infrastructure, which is already part of our conversations, but I would put it probably as a top priority. So if we can focus on defense industrial production, capability delivery, and on critical infrastructure protection, including military mobility, I think we have a very strong and concrete way to contribute to a stronger European defense and to a strong deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. So those would be my 2 cents.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Benedetta, for those great important remarks. I'd like to now invite to give his remarks, excuse me if I pronounce it wrong, Mr. Julien Routard-Sampol. I did my best. And might I underline that, of course, representing the European External Action Service, who has a driving seat in terms of development, strategic and defense partnerships, and hence will be very important to learn what is the current state of affairs, if we can say, and path forward. Julien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and you got it quite well. First of all, I would like to thank the European Parliament. I'm very happy to be here. I used to work on parliamentary affairs in the European External Action Service, and it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Steady Rapporteur, the Honourable Member for who's Szczerba, who is also the Rapporteur for Security and Defence Partnerships. And we are delighted to be also with the Presidency, which has shown that until the last day, security and defence partnerships are a priority. So this is our cup of tea. This is what I do on a daily basis. I lead the division on security and defence partnerships in the EAS, so that the fact that the Parliament gives attention to it, it's only good. I will try to stick to the time, but I think it will be difficult because the scope of partnerships of the European Union is global. I will first address, let's say, the more multilateral angle because of the NATO dimension that was just covered by Benedetta, and also then the bilateral one, which I think is the core business of what we are addressing. And all this comes because in 2022, when the European Union adopts the strategic compass, one of the 4 pillars it establishes is about partnering, and it's a very basic realization. If challenges and threats know no borders, therefore we need friends to tackle them. The European Union on its own cannot do it alone. So a first multilateral angle with a focus on NATO, because the compass says that there are 2 strategic partners for the European Union in the multilateral dimension. One is the United Nations, and the other one is NATO. Benedetta said a lot about it, and it makes me be in a better position to meet the timelines. But just let me say that, I mean, this is a long-standing cooperation. We have impressive breadth of staff-to-staff cooperation, but it goes top-down. Since last week's participation in the NATO summit, also in high-level engagements and the European Council, ministerial level, we have up to 7 structured dialogues only this year constituted on defense industry and cyber. And happily, we have resumed the so-called PSC NACS meetings, which is the best and, let's say, display of how organization to organization, and only the the staff, but also the members can work together and must work together, because it is essential. We are going through a critical time for EU defense. It's the numerous commitments of the high-level engagements that last week show it. We are increasing our efforts to defense readiness of Europe. So therefore, the European Union can only welcome the commitment of allies last week to up to the 5%. And I think there's no risk in saying, as my colleague from the European Commission has said, that we are helping the EU member states to meet the NATO, the commitments that member states that are also allies, the 23 common members, to meet this NATO commitment. So we work hand in hand as we sit next to each other. Examples of it is the National Escape Clause, it's the SAVE instrument, but my colleague in the Commission has said it best before. What is important to know is the security and defense partnerships angle, meaning that these are open tools and open to candidates, to future candidates, to members of the European Economic Area, but also those that signed these beautiful new papers we have developed called Security and Defense Partnerships. And I will now try to work on this because this is the bilateral tool. Only last Monday in the EU-Canada Summit, the last one of these 8 security and defense partnerships we have managed to sign in the last year was adopted. It was very timely, and it shows, let's say, the logic, incremental momentum in terms of EU-NATO engagements, but also transatlantic bonds. The idea is that the EU wants to be a predictable, a credible, a reliable partner in the global scene, also in the field of security and defense. The security and defense partnerships are overarching frameworks on security and defense matters. It's a paper that provides a political message in which you have the different types of dialogues we have with the partners, and then you have the different areas you cover. It is important to realize that we have managed only in 1 year to sign 8 of them. So just for the sake of memory, Moldova, Norway, Japan, South Korea, North Macedonia, Albania, UK, and Canada, and more to come, of course. We are trying to address it in a manner that it's also reflecting the global scope. So we should not only be looking at the transatlantic logics and the European center of gravity, but also, as you can see already, 2 cases in Asia, but also we will be looking at Latin America and Africa. Important to say that although you were very kind to say that the EEAS is in the driving chair, here it's the Council in the driving chair deciding. So it's member states letting us do these agreements because it's indeed a common security and defense policy instrument. But these are only one tool. We do have up to 90 dialogues with up to 44 different partners. We have overarching security and defense dialogues covering the whole spectrum of the relation. We also have specific dialogues on counterterrorism, on non-proliferation and disarmament, on maritime, on cyber, on hybrid. Only this year, we developed new ones with UK, Nigeria, South Africa, and are to come with India and Brazil. The agendas of the relation are also evolving because the European Union as a security and defense actor is also evolving. So how we mirror our common interest is also adapting to the increasing reality. And it's not only about dialogues, it's also about concrete cooperation. It's about tabletop exercises, it's about maritime activities such as port calls, PASEX. It's also about how we welcome third countries' participation in our missions and operations. So the breadth and scope of our relation is huge. And if I can finish with one word, also mentioning the European Parliament, is that we have developed also this beautiful platform called the Schuman Forum, in which we gather all our friends and partners from ministries of defense and also multilateral organizations. And it is very kindly held here in these fantastic premises, actually in this building. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And we have just 5 minutes now before we'll need to welcome the president. So maybe, Elena, if we can have your remarks, that would be very much appreciated. Let me just introduce Elena Lazaru, who is the Senior Policy Analyst at the European Parliament Research Center, wrote a really great briefing on EU strategic defense and security partnerships. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin, and good morning to all. A very big thank you to Mr. Szczerba, but also to the Polish presidency and the Commission and all stakeholders involved for inviting two of us, actually, from the European Parliament's Research Service, Sebastian Klapp and myself, to contribute. Of course, as the security and defense area moves forward, we find that we have to do more and more research, and there is much more to do research on, and including, if I may add, from the parliamentary research side, to ensure that implementation, oversight, and whatever type of scrutiny can be done of these agreements is also part and parcel of what is happening. New things, new ways of parliamentary involvement. But Martin asked me to use my 5 minutes to talk about the content of the tailored bilateral partnerships, to discuss a bit the enlargement and Western Balkan, well, broadly Western Balkan, plus including the enlargement countries, a role in that, and how we move from paper to implementation. So let me take a couple of minutes on each of these points. And of course, I saw Guillaume come in and I thought, okay, the content is covered already. But let me just add up a bit of insight from the research side. What I think is interesting about the 8 existing and more to come partnerships is, first of all, what are the areas of commonality? And we did some research. We identified about 27. Now they are actually 32 with Canada and the UK areas of cooperation. 10 of them are in all the security and defense partnerships. And that is interesting because that means there you have a lot of space for multilateral cooperation. And I won't go through which ones they are, but just to say, suffice it to say that CSDP, hybrid, cyber, FIMI, training, these are counterterrorism, women, peace and security, these are part of all of them. And of course, that makes sense. Actually, when we go to the more specific niche areas of the defense industry, or where we go to climate security, these are depending on which country is on the other side, because obviously the point of these partnerships is the mutual areas of interest, which explains the second point, which is that NATO ally countries, so in this case we have the UK, we have Canada, and we have Norway, they tend to exhibit more similarities in the partnerships which they have with the EU. So there also you see the space for cooperation within NATO becomes interesting. And then finally there are the enlargement countries, NATO allies also, I didn't mention Albania and North Macedonia, and enlargement countries as well. There we see another type of interest, and obviously proximity to Ukraine also accentuates the potential interest in that and the partnerships. So I think it's interesting to observe these issues. And a second observation, which I would like to make before moving to the second point, is the institutionalization of certain things in those partnerships. And that will also link to my point about how to go to implementation. So there are some institutional points which are commonly mentioned. For example, does the country have an administrative arrangement with the EDA? Is there a security of information agreement, which there is with all of them actually? Is there some text in the text that says that this country and connection with the PSC or the council should be increased? In the Canadian case, there's specifically the reference to the posting of a Canadian defense envoy to the EU. So these are the kind of institutional things. It's very easy to monitor implementation as well, so I think it's important to mention. Moving to the Western Balkans and enlargement countries more widely, I think these are very interesting areas to explore. We know what's happening with Ukraine. The integration is really progressing of the defense industry, joint ventures, inclusion in defense initiatives like SAFE, and others. So that part, mutually reinforcing the defense industry, but also the support for Ukraine, that is, I think, unknown, maybe lesser known, and there's interesting research on this, is the potential of the other enlargement countries for the defense industry, the potential to produce at low cost and high scale things like 155 millimeter shells, drones, other types of ammunition, and of course in the strategic enabler category, due to proximity, the importance for potential for military mobility when we think of all the space from Southeast Europe to the Black Sea going up to the north. So that's also just a couple of things. And then of course, I don't have time, but there is a lot to say about the potential to work with CSDP and other areas. And finally, how to go to implementation. Well, obviously, and that's very important for the European Parliament. We've seen the recent discussions on SAFE. Parliament wants to have a very important role, as whatever is allowed in the treaty is very important in ensuring that everything is implemented in coordination with the international and European law. A couple of things, I think, of course, the security and defense dialogues are foreseen. A sense of monitoring of progress in many ways, like in the Compass, would be interesting to see in those dialogues. Equally, the Schuman Forum, I think I've been to both of them, there've been two, right? Maybe now moving towards a time of looking also at, the accomplishments and how is cooperation moving. Obviously, the review clauses in all these agreements are very important in the sense of, when is the moment for review? I mean, the wording is quite vague, but there is also, that element. And then, of course, the like-mindedness, which the like-mindedness is embedded in all provisions for third country participation, and there's no real way to measure it, except perhaps in the enlargement countries, we have these annual reports that measure alignment with CFSP. So I think, that is a good criterion to use to measure the like-mindedness. Obviously, NATO ally like-mindedness is sort of given in security and defense, but there also, there are cases where they're also enlargement countries. So just to say, this is a very big project. It's a very necessary project because it's very clear in the current geopolitical environment, the EU cannot do this alone. I think the partner pillar of the compass, which Guillaume mentioned, it applies to all the other pillars. So securing, investing, and acting, all these things to do with the others in each and every point. And of course, the multilateral dimension, and I'll finish here, obviously cannot be forgotten because in a lot of those partnerships, there is a commitment to work together in the UN and other institutions, including on economic security issues, supply chain issues. So this goes beyond the UN, and it is a very important moment for economic security. Defense and security cannot be done without economic security. So I finish here.
Thank you very much, Elena. This was extremely concise and knowledgeable, I must say. I think we could, deep dive into all of those points, and hopefully we will, in the second part of our conversation. I promised some questions and answers and a discussion. We will be getting into this after two very important points of our event today, which will be the speech by the President of the European Parliament and the remarks about the report from Michał Szczerba. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm passing back the floor to you. Welcome our guest.
Let's wait for Roberta.
Getting information. Yes, that the President should be with us very, very shortly. But again, to reiterate, a great thank you also to Benedetta, who had to leave, for her opening remarks. And for the remarks from Mr. Husak from the European Commission and from Ambassador Friedrichak for the connecting with the European, with the presidency of the European Union of Poland.
Okay, maybe.
So
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Marcin. And maybe I will start my presentation, and in a meanwhile, the President of the European Parliament will join us. I would like to, first of all, thank you. I would like to thank very much for the rich and valuable interventions we've already had today, and this panel discussion will continue after the key address given by the President of the European Parliament. But let me briefly introduce the idea of the report on EU strategic defense and security partnerships, for which I have the great honor to be the rapporteur. First, the report situates EU security and defense partnerships within the broader context of EU's CSDP. The strategic compass commits the EU to engage more coherently, consistently, and comprehensively with bilateral partners, building tailored partnerships based on shared values and interests. The most recent Council conclusions reaffirms these directions, and they state that Europe must become more sovereign, more responsible for its own defense, and better equipped to act and with 360-degree approach. They also highlight that the EU leaders are welcomed our recent partnerships with the UK and Canada. In this context, the IP report will aim to give political direction for implementing the further developing partnerships while taking stock of progress made so far. The current international environment presents growing threats to our shared security, and this requires deeper cooperation and partnerships that deliver concrete results and enhance real capabilities. The report explores how partnerships can support broader goals, including the development of the European Defence Union, and to achieve this, we need the EU-NATO partnerships and transatlantic cooperation. Increased defense spending and the new EU initiatives are required to build a stronger, more capable and credible European pillar within the alliance. It also reviews the geographic reach of partnership and cooperation. As it was said many times, the EU has signed 8 formal partnerships with Norway, Moldova, South Korea, Japan, Albania, North Macedonia, the UK, and Canada. The report will assess how to best implement this and identify key priorities moving forward. It will also look towards nuance, and of course, Australia being a good example. While partnerships will differ in scope based on mutual interests, common focus areas include CSDP missions and operations, which remain central to the EU's external security engagement. These are closely linked with the EU's work on conflict prevention, crisis management, and post-conflict stabilization. Other shared priorities include integrated border management, maritime security, intelligence sharing, and strategic foresight, all of which are becoming more essential. Long-term sustained support for Ukraine remains a vital component, including building a direct partnerships and strengthening cooperation with its defense industry. Partnership must also address emerging and non-traditional threats. The EU's work on hybrid threats, cybersecurity, and resilience building is increasingly central. Capacity building, especially in cyber domain, demonstrates our dual focus on internal resilience and external cooperation. This includes strengthening critical infrastructure protection, strategic communication, and countering foreign information manipulation and interference. Counterterrorism, the prevention of violent extremism, and tackling issues like trafficking in human beings and small arms are also key comprehensive and integrated security frameworks with our partners. And now I have the great honor to invite the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. I have the great honor to invite the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, to deliver the keynote address of our seminar. Roberta, we appreciate your leadership in this House of Democracy and your commitment to the creation of the fully pledged Security and Defense Committee. I know that strengthening EU partnership is important to you. This seminar in the European Parliament is the last event under the patronage of the Polish presidency. We have done our job and put security at the top of the agenda. I'm sure that the Danish presidency will take this work forward. Madam President, Roberta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Michał. Good morning to you all. Dear Ms. Friedrichek, I see that Mr. Husak is here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure, Mr. Burzanski, to be here with you today. First of all, thank you, dear Michał, for giving us all a forum to discuss the very important issue of how we keep Europeans safe. When we ran for the election last year, you could tell that country after country where you went, especially your own, citizens were telling us to deliver what they felt was the most important for them. And security would be among the one or two top concerns that each citizen had. So we had a very clear mandate as a legislature as soon as we reconvened and Michał joined this parliament to deliver on what our citizens wanted. This conversation that you are having today, I'm sure will build into your upcoming report of the SEDE committee, which is our newly upgraded Defense Committee, also a result of the enhanced commitment given by this Parliament to security and defense. I look forward to reading it, and also I'm confident, dear Michał, that this will help level up our approach to Europe's defense and security partnerships. And this is why the Polish presidency could not have come at a better time. The motto Security Europe, which was launched 6 months ago when Poland took over the rotating presidency, we saw as a call to action. And we stepped up. And in fact, today, as the presidency draws to a close, and I congratulate you, as I congratulated your government for having done an excellent job, your words have become, in a way, our guiding compass. And I can tell you that this was very much reflected at last week's European Council, when I was present. This comes, of course, such a report, not a moment too soon, when the world around us is becoming more uncertain, it's becoming more unpredictable, and instability is on the rise globally. The situation in the Middle East is volatile. It's still very deeply concerning. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, we woke up to yet another devastating attack, in fact, the worst since the Russian invasion, which continues to devastate lives and threaten our security. And the repercussions of these threats pose an existential danger, not just to our continent, but to the global security order. And we don't say this enough, because we must face facts. Last week's NATO summit was pretty clear in that regard. Right now, over 2/3 of Europeans want our union to play a greater role in protecting them. And in many member states, people back higher defense spending. In other member states, this is a conversation that needs to be had. Not many political leaders want to have that conversation, but it is important that it is. And also a reflection of last week's meetings, international-wise, show that Europe can be united in this regard. So clearly, we urgently need to invest more, we need to produce more, and most importantly, we need to cooperate more. Should be obvious, but frankly, it's not in the European Union. So what have we given ourselves as a task in order to deliver and rise to the challenge? Today, we start long-awaited interinstitutional negotiations also under the Polish presidency, and I'm happy about that, on the European Defence Industry Programme. We managed to get an agreement on this among the political groups in this House in record time, because we recognized the challenge, and we also answered the call of the other institutions to be fast and to be able to contribute as co-legislators with responsibility and with speed. This will boost our defence base's industrial readiness. It will foster joint procurement, that's important, and it will support Ukraine's defence industry. We also, in addition, aim to finalize the defence omnibus package by the end of the year. This will accelerate investment, simplify industry frameworks, and end bottlenecks. Now, we all know, of course, that making this happen requires funding, and that's why we welcome Europe's move to raise the financial commitment to security, unlocking up to 800 billion euros to fund the progress that we need in our defense sector. We question the method used and the legislative base that aims not to consult or even have the parliament on an equal footing. We wanted to send a strong signal on this, because if you want to give democratic legitimacy to decisions you take, you need the directly elected co-legislators to be able to place that stamp of approval, because in fact there is a stamp of approval in this parliament, and it's quite clear. However, Against all this is, as this event highlights, we absolutely cannot build security and peace by acting alone, because when the world, and it really feels at any time that like it is on fire, the only way, in a way, to extinguish those flames is to increase cooperation. So if we look back at the steady climb, hopefully, which will be met towards 5%, the new GDP target agreed at last week's NATO summit, with total defense expenditure across member states, if we look back the 4 years, they have already risen 30%. Meanwhile, we are strengthening our defense and security partnerships with like-minded partners globally, including in recent years with Japan, Norway, and South Korea. And also, in the past few months, we've seen unprecedented levels of cooperation with Canada, but also with the United Kingdom, which is important for us, but also for them. At the same time, we are deepening our cooperation with Ukraine through our joint security commitments. We do this also from a legislative perspective, where we are hand in hand helping committee to committee cooperation, also in terms of legislative approximation for them to put them on a path to membership, and also to ramp up our comprehensive commitment for Ukrainians militarily, financially, and politically. Each of this is a step forward for Europe. I joined this parliament 12 years ago. I never thought that the priorities would change so fundamentally, legislature on legislature. But I'm proud to be in a parliament that is adaptable. We have reformed completely our rules last mandate in order for us to become more agile, and that's exactly what we're doing in this area. Whereas in the past, it would have been an area exclusively left for member states. But because of our legislative capability and our role, then we can really do it properly. So we have the vision, we have the networks. With events like this, please be vocal, please speak to the members of the European Parliament that are responsible, and not only just Michał and me, so speak to others. I think if we have these kind of events regularly, we will manage to have a real stamp on security and defense steps that are taken in this legislature, when we look back and say, we really delivered, as I started, on what the citizens asked us when they voted for us last year. And that is a world in which they feel a little bit safer than they do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you, the President of the European Parliament. We count on you. As you can see, we tried to gather all the best experts on this issue, and we are just starting our work, my work as a reporter on the strategic defense and security partnerships. So
It's life difficult, huh?
yeah,
Don't make it too easy for me.
I'm a freshman, so I'm following your example. You are a very hardworking MIP, and so we want to examine existing partnerships, but also what we want to do is to encourage new ones, and I really count on your continued cooperation in this important work. So our debate will go on. And thank you for your time. Thank you for this 6 months working so closely with the Polish presidency, and it was a successful story. We need to write a new chapter with Danish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have a good meeting. Bye.
Okay, Marcin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Oh. All right, closer to the center again. And thank you very much again, Ambassador. The remarks are done. Yes, so ladies and gentlemen, if we can have a few moments now to have more of an open discussion. Perhaps I actually have a follow-up for Jilem, which I didn't manage to ask yet, but I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about the kind of mechanisms and clauses we have for updating the partnerships as we go, because we live in times that things happen in such a dramatically fast way, and circumstances change, new ones emerge. How are the partnerships constructed in a way that they can be quickly adjusted to respond to those new realities? Middle Eastern conflict is a good example, but it could be many others. So if you could give us a few words on this, and then I'll open the floor also for the room to ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, the security and defense partnerships are quite a flexible tool, and according indeed to the strategic compass, they are tailored to the partner. They are not one size fits all, and therefore already reflect the existing relation. But as you rightly said, reality goes faster than we think, and all the documents, all the security and defense partnerships have a review clause at the end in which it establishes the possibility of upgrading, upscaling, or even putting to suspension if need be. It's a matter of the council and the two parties to agree. So the instrument is sufficiently flexible and scalable, and I do believe that while providing a sufficient framework that doesn't require review, if need be, it can be reviewed. So it's fit for purpose.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Jalem from the room at the moment? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for this conference. My name is Stella Veliki. I have studied physics and informatics. I am a member of the European Physical Society, and I have three very short questions. First one is how far are you with the European nuclear defense? A lot of countries, they are very interesting. I don't hear about nothing speaking about this. The second is about China. China became in the short time military and power, and the nuclear power. How do you see this situation? And last one is the new technology. I think that it's very important to take in account the new technology in the defense. I was only give you an example about the quantic navigation system, that it's very new now. It's testing on the military avions with positive results. You don't need telecommunications satellite, and it's some complementary to the GPS navigation system.
Right, so collaboration on those points. Thank you very much. I'll take this this question. Perhaps also, Elena, if you can give your remarks on this, that would be great. China.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, sorry, I went out, I thought our panel was over, so I'm sorry if I missed a question before. Well, on these topics, which as I understand is nuclear, emerging technologies, and China, correctly? In the context of security and defense partnerships, actually, before when I mentioned that there are areas that we can note across all security and defense partnerships, so nuclear is one of them. All of the security and defense partnerships commit to upholding the nuclear non-proliferation regime, and that it has become even more important, I think, given recent events, even though the texts were conceptualized before. In fact, I remember when the security and defense partnership with the Republic of Korea was signed, you know, it was clear why it would be there for them. But now, of course, I think globally, and with Moldova, but I think now globally we have Russia, we have North Korea, there is the situation in Iran. I think those like-minded countries are all on board with upholding the nuclear non-proliferation regime, but also making sure that the enforcement of certain treaties that are currently being violated are upheld. And this comes really from a place of like-mindedness, because all the partners are committed to international law. And, you know, when we think of Brazil, for example, that I know quite well, and the upcoming discussion that Guillaume has mentioned, I think that will be a very important part of that too. EDTs, you want me to stop?
Yeah, well,
okay.
just
I can see
come
your
back to
eyes.
this. Yes, because also just before in this first session break, I wanted to give the floor to Mr. Christian Lupert. Am I pronouncing it right? Yes, visiting fellow at the Wilfred Martis Center for European Studies and Professor Royal Military College of Canada's Queen University, who's also the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Military Journal. So Christian, if we can also hear your intervention, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, I'll keep it brief. So politics is ultimately about making choices, and the choice that we're making is to defend democracy, because for 35 years we've been taking democracy for granted. And we also need to change our perspective on how we defend democracy, because of course, if you read Unrestricted Warfare, perhaps the most important book on security and defense to be published in the last quarter century, you understand that our adversaries already consider themselves to be at war and in conflict with us. So this is an investment in sovereignty, it's an investment in counterbalancing the vagaries of US unilateralism, and it's an investment in burden shifting, but it's also an opportunity to invest in the instruments of statecraft. And so this isn't just about defense, it's ultimately about the ability to assert interests, and to assert interests, you have a very capable European Action Service, but you lack the fundamental instrument to implement a number of the key efforts. And so we've already heard about the need to talk less about defense and talk more about deterrence. And the opportunity that that presents to change the equation. We've heard too much talk about values and not enough talk about security. And ultimately, it's security that generates prosperity, and it's prosperity that generates democracy. Unfortunately, not the other way around. And so this is about pace, and it's about scale. My second point is on expenditures. We've had $500 billion a year for the last 35 years that the US has invested more than European allies and Canada have. The delta over 35 years is about $20 trillion. And Europe spends about 3 to 4 times more per piece of equipment than does the United States. As a result, people like Adam Tooze talk about Europe's zombie armies. And so the question is, you know, it's a modest investment, I would say, sort of overall. It's an important investment. But if we look at the large expenditure packages, the fiscal stability mechanism, the post-pandemic recovery, these have not been among the most successful European efforts in terms of spending. And so there's a significant challenge here in terms of the legitimacy and articulating this to Europeans, and why they need to pay a higher insurance premium in the environment that you live in, and making sure that that insurance premium is well spent. There's also the proposal to partner perhaps with countries such as the EU and Canada on a proposal known as, that you're like familiar with, the Defense Security Investment Bank, that would open the market for defense goods beyond sort of Europe and close partners to about 70 partner countries. And ultimately, we need a mechanism, and we need to think about procurement, I think, as part of that deterrence effort for the tyrant in Moscow, because ultimately there's only one game in town, and that game is to change the mind of the folks in Moscow. The third point is on mechanisms. You have a number of mechanisms that look effective, but if you look at PESCO projects, many of them run behind. We talk a lot about sort of reaching out beyond Europe, but why are we doing this? This is ultimately about defense in depth. To demonstrate to our adversaries that we have redundancy built in by being able to procure supply chains and manufacture far offshore. The investment in innovation, I think we need to do a much better job at articulating that this is, if you look at the Draghi report, indeed an investment in innovation and economic growth. We can do much better on university partnerships, if you look in particular how Australia partners with universities. And I think we need to do a better job at articulating this is not just about Russia. This is ultimately about all the flanks, the Arctic flank, the Mediterranean flanks, but also the Euro-Atlantic community, and ultimately continental defense, because you need secure North America in order to have the assurance of extended nuclear deterrence. And the fourth point is on strategic effects. What we ultimately need to do is change the risk calculus, that for 25 years, politicians have put all the risk on military operations. And so this means politicians actually needing to take political, financial, and reputational risk. I know you're prepared to do that, but I don't hear that resoundingly across Europe. In terms of US partnerships, on which you asked me to comment in particular, that depends on your environment. We need to partner with the US on strategic enablers, but some of these Europe already has significant capabilities. Intelligence, for instance, Europe has the satellite capabilities, not for military targeting, but for intelligence collection. It's a question of, these are civilian assets. Is Europe prepared to retask these civilian assets for intelligence purposes. It also depends on NATO complementarity. For instance, in the maritime domain, the United States isn't particularly interested in working too closely because they can produce enough of their own, and the Army, the land domain, interoperability is sort of less important. But when you talk about the aerospace, and space domain, interoperability is the name of the game. So those are sort of where we need to address our, put our emphasis. And ultimately, I think the question in terms of the US partnership is where and how is Europe going to add value for the community as a whole? And that's, I think, the ultimate outcome of these secure and defense partnerships.
Thank you very much, Christian, for those concise and important remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are reaching a moment where we're going to take a very short break until 12 to get some coffees and network a little bit, following which we'll continue the conversations and come back to the questions from the room and some additional speakers. So I want to thank you very much for being here on the first part. Grab a coffee, and at 12 we're going to resume. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if anybody's still picking up coffee, water, juice, please join us in the room. We'll move to the second session of today's event, the Implementing EU Defense and Security Partnerships, Key Mechanisms and Initiatives. So in this session, we'll want to dive a little bit deeper into how actually we can implement the partnerships and what mechanisms have been including in them and what mechanisms perhaps should be strengthened and made more operational in order to get the most out of the partnerships. We have fantastic experts who are going to share their remarks with us, and also we should have more space and time for questions and answers. I would like to start by inviting Mr. Gontram Wolf, who's a professor at the Université Libre de Bruxelles and the senior fellow at Bruegel. Gontram, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. And it's, of course, a very important event and very important to discuss partnerships and future cooperation on defense in Europe and more broadly. And I guess I wanted to sort of structure my remarks around 3 points. The first point is perhaps more narrowly on the issue of the partnership, or more broadly on the issue of the partnership. The second point is focusing more specifically on defense markets. And the third point is on the question of technology in defense products, which I think is absolutely critical if we want to win the race for deterrence in Europe. So very quickly on the first point, I mean, we've heard a lot on, I would say, on the NATO partnership, which is, of course, the transatlantic central pillar of our security. However, speaking here in the European Parliament and with the benefit of being an independent academic, I really would hope that in the European discussion, in the parliamentary discussion, we put a strong emphasis on thinking about European, deep European cooperation for situations where the NATO alliance might not be quite as strong as it looks like after last week's summit. So and you know the reason is very simple. I mean, we are at the moment not just in terms of the military markets, defense product markets, but in particular in terms of military leadership, political leadership, and strategic leadership, very much dependent on the transatlantic alliance and on NATO. And that has a lot of strengths and has served us well as Europeans, and we all hope that it continues. But I just want to warn that it can very easily and very extremely quickly actually become very unstable. And that depends and is perhaps most easily symbolized by the SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander, that currently is a very, very excellent general, right? I mean, General Cavoli, who is sort of an outstanding leader and I think very committed to transatlantic security, but he is retiring very soon, and we don't know who's gonna succeed him. And so I think very quickly we might have all of a sudden a situation where sort of cooperation among European countries becomes much more critical than it is now. So that's perhaps the first point. The second is more narrowly on the defense markets. So what and that Christian Leubrecht, I think, already made that point. What we are seeing is that European countries are procuring at extremely high prices, right? And together with colleagues at the Kiel Institute and at Bruegel, we have compiled a very detailed procurement tracker in which we track what European countries have been procuring since 2020, all based on open source information, obviously. And we look at, in particular, at Germany, at the UK, at France, and at Poland. So 4 big European countries. And what you see very clearly is that the quantities that European countries order are relatively small. So these are, we order in small quantities, and the prices are actually quite high and higher, even higher when you have even smaller quantities ordered. So there's a negative correlation between the amount of weapons systems ordered and the price per unit, which is exactly what basic economics would tell you. So basically, we need to have scale. We need to have larger orders to bring down the costs. And we don't have that in Europe. And why don't we have that? Well, basically because we almost exclusively procure at the level of individual countries. And then a lot of national gold plating is happening, basically individual countries not just wanting to buy from their domestic companies, but also wanting little modifications that might not even be necessary from a purely military perspective. So pushing us to work further in terms of standardization, scale, and joint procurements, I think is the name of the game to bring down the costs, because otherwise the 800 billion that we are talking about, right, at the moment in terms of additional debt, and it's a lot of additional debt, by the way. For several countries, it might be quite difficult to do this much debt, but the 800 billion is actually not going to be sufficient if we all buy at the high price. So the cost differences are huge. I would say a factor of 2 or 3 easily, that you bring down the cost by a factor of 2 or 3 easily if you do more efficient procurement. And that requires deep cooperation at the European level, including the UK, ideally, if you can. My third point quickly on technology. So we looked at, in this last report published just 10 days ago at the Kiel Institute, we looked in detail at import dependencies of European countries. And, the general statement that European countries buy everything in America, and that's a huge vulnerability, huge dependency, is just wrong. I mean, we buy mostly national, actually. The big countries, France buys French, Germany buys still majority German, the UK buys British. So countries do buy national. Poland is, in a sense, an exception. Poland buys very international in particular from South Korea and the US. But the other countries do have a very significant component of domestic purchases. But the second biggest sort of provider of weapons for any individual country is not another European ally. It is, if we buy abroad, we basically buy in the United States. And here comes the problem. The problem is not that we buy in the United States. The problem becomes that some of the most high-tech stuff is stuff that we don't procure from the domestic industrial base, the European domestic industrial base. And I think that's an issue because there are some technologies that, even established technologies that we just don't master, right? I mean, so missiles, we do have some very good missile companies, but then for some missiles, we simply depend on buying them from the United States at this point in time, even though it's a mature technology. Tomahawk missiles, for example. If you want to get some degree of technological independence, you have to invest into some of these things domestically, and that means in the European market. Now, when it comes to the very cutting edge stuff, basically Ukraine has become an important leader, the Ukraine industrial base, and we should rely on the Ukraine industrial base and work with them very closely. But really, we need to push, I would say, very much also the development of modern weapons. The modernization of our armed forces is absolutely critical from a military point of view, but also from a cost effectiveness point of view. I mean, we simply cannot rely, I would say, on the old system of buying established platforms that are very expensive and might actually be much less useful than they used to be only a few years ago. So this modernization aspect is something that a lot of national procurement agencies will find very difficult to do because that's not against their DNA. But where I think the European institutions can add value by sort of pushing the partnership to go into these directions, right? So drones, AI-based deterrence, AI-based intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in that space that is developing extremely fast, is extremely effective, and where I think our nation states will find it difficult to really get to the front. So that's an area where I would say partnership would be really helpful. So in conclusion, I think European cooperation to bring down costs is critical. European cooperation to bring down, get more effective weapons is critical. European cooperation for technological development is also the name of the game, and we should invest into that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your remarks. These will be followed by remarks from Mr. Sebastian Klapp, who's with us here from the European Parliament Research Service. Sebastian has been working quite a bit also on EU strategic defense and security partnerships. So if you could share a little bit on your insights, we'd be very grateful.
Thanks so much for giving me the floor and inviting me. In contrast to Professor Wolf, I don't have the benefit of being an independent academic. I work in the internal think tank of the Parliament, just to note. So just to give a bit of an overview, so due to the dramatically changed security environment, the EU has taken very bold steps. A lot of this has already been mentioned before, but this has been a transformation that has sort of rested on a dual approach. On the one hand, we are strengthening internal defense industrial integration, and on the other, we are expanding partnerships with like-minded third countries in NATO. A lot of this is outlined in the Strategic Compass and also now in the White Paper on European Defense or Readiness 2030, which sets out a very ambitious agenda to operationalize this vision until 2030. And there are at least three aspects to this. First, to put it very positively, the EU capability development initiatives are really forging ahead. Over 5 billion euros have been committed for joint R&D under the European Defence Fund, 300 million under ETIRPA that has been mentioned before, 500 million under the Act in Support of Ammunition Production. And now the over 70 projects were launched under the Permanent Structured Cooperation. And now EDIP, which is of course still under negotiation, is consolidating the whole thing and furthering it with an additional 1.5 billion euros. And then most importantly, 800 billion euros is being leveraged under REARM, of which 150 are for the SAFE instrument. These mechanisms are not only furthering industrial integration, but they are strategic investments to achieve the 2030 goals of industrial competitiveness, strategic autonomy, and security. These are very substantial funds, especially now with the 800 billion euros that are being leveraged. Importantly here also the new concept of European defense projects of common interests, which are really sort of represent a revolution in joint capability development. They build on already existing planning initiatives such as the Coordinated Annual Review in Defense, and they are encouraging member states, importantly, to plan together, to develop together, and to procure together. And it is important to note, emphasize here that these programs already include partners. So the European Defence Agency has made agreements, so-called administrative agreements, with a number of countries, including Norway, Switzerland, Serbia, and the US. Norway, the US, and Canada are participating in the PESCO military mobility project. The UK has been invited. In several European Defence Fund projects, partners are participating. So for instance, the Norwegian company Kongsberg is a part of quite a few European Defence Fund projects, and Norway is an associated country. Then of course, EDIP, once it is approved, will have Norway as an associated country, will allow Ukraine to participate in joint procurement, and there will be a specific Ukraine support instrument. And then even more importantly is that the SAFE instrument that has already been approved sort of opens this defense mechanism to an even broader partnership base. And especially important that has already been mentioned before, the UK. So in SAFE, countries can also participate in joint procurement if they have a security and defense partnership with the EU, which includes the UK. And these partnerships, of course, foster joint R&D with partners. They also integrate partners into EU-led value chains, while at the same time the EU is maintaining control over EU critical technologies and safeguards EU interests. My second point is, of course, that the EU-NATO partnership is deepening. This has already been talked about a lot before, but is important to mention. Of course, 23 member states are also NATO members, and NATO continues to be the cornerstone of collective defense and will also continue to be so. The EU and NATO are improving coordination on things such as defense planning, defense industrial cooperation, and standardization. And significantly last week, of course, the new 5% of GDP defense spending target was agreed to, with 3.5% on core defense spending and another 1.5% on resilience and broader security. And due to these increases in spending in the foreseeable future, this makes EU-NATO cooperation even more important to avoid duplication and mutually reinforce deterrence. Thirdly, the already mentioned EU defense partnerships are going from cooperation to strategic alignment. So since the 2022 Strategic Compass, 8 such partnerships have been concluded with countries such as Canada, Japan, Norway, South Korea, and the UK. And these increasingly also include things on industrial cooperation and capability development. And importantly here, of course, is the SAFE instrument that I just mentioned before, because this will enable these partners that have security and defense partnerships with the EU to participate in joint procurement. And that's how we also get to the economies of scale that Professor Wolf mentioned just before. Another very interesting example here is the Build with Ukraine initiative that was launched last month, which enables both EU member states and partners to host production lines for Ukrainian-designed weapons, thus supplying Ukraine and the EU and partners with such weapons, while at the same time deepening industrial integration. But at the same time, these initiatives also raise a key question. This is, how do we deepen cooperation without diluting strategic control? And in all of these initiatives, there already are very strict safeguards. So in the mentioned EU tools, these are tools to sort of shape these strategic partnerships on EU terms. Especially in EDIB and SAFE, there is a cap on components from non-associate third countries. There's a very strict Buy European rule. It contains very strict safeguards. In EDIB, at least in the which is of course still under negotiation, but there is a strict requirement to preserve EU design authority, compliance with security standards, and also a way to protect intellectual property. But ultimately, the test, of course, in all of this will be on implementation. And this is exactly where the European Parliament reports on strategic defense partnerships comes in, because the European Parliament can give its views on this implementation. I hope I have kept to my 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, certainly, and a lot of very good points, which we will follow up in the Q&A. But before we reach that stage, I'd also like to give a floor to my old colleague and a really great expert when it comes to European defense, NATO, and the areas that we're discussing, Mr. Dominik Jankowski, who has just recently joined the Parliament, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, leading its Economics and Security Committee. Dominik, pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcin, and many thanks to MP Szczerba for this kind of invitation. Indeed, I've joined a parliamentary assembly. It's not as truly a parliament as the European Parliament, but MEP Szczerba knows it very well. As a former NATO PA president, he knows the added value of that angle of NATO cooperation as well. Happy to be here. I thought I would give you an overview of my last 8 years in NATO and how I think we've also evolved in thinking about the EU. So when I started, NATO was brain dead. Now I'm not entirely sure who is dead, but apparently not NATO and not the EU. The main message after 8 years that I kept for myself is that thanks to the EU, we made deterrence great again. It's actually a fact that without the EU, we wouldn't, as NATO, be able to do it. We not always underline that fact, due to, of course, different competencies that the organizations are having. But it's very important that right now in NATO, we see the European Union as a critical enabler of, in fact, deterrence and defense. And there are like 3 major elements that are keeping us in line, be it in NATO and in the EU. First is political will. Both organizations are having a very clear political will to enhance deterrence and defense. For different mechanisms, different means, but I think the political goal is clear. Second component of that are, of course, capabilities, and I think both Professor Wolf, but also previous colleagues in the previous panel talked about how we need to ensure that we are having the right capabilities in place, or from where we are going to take those capabilities. I don't think it's that easy to say everything we are going to buy is going to be European. That's probably not going to be the case. For different capabilities, we'll have to look outside of the EU. But that's exactly the element of that partnership that we'll have to build with non-EU partners at stake, be it the United States, be it Indo-Pacific, be it the United Kingdom, be it Turkey. My third point is cash, so basically money. In the end, I mean, and the last few months were exceptional in the EU. The EU has become a real creative engine of finding additional resources for defense, which I think is exactly the way to go. You know, of course, NATO is splashy. We do it our style, 5% GDP on defense. That's the new threshold. I'll talk about that in a second, but I think we will have to, and that's something that I want to keep in mind, we'll have to reinvent our economic architecture in order to sustain 5% GDP on defense. You cannot sustain 5% GDP on defense with the current economic financial architecture in Europe. EU is stepping in the right direction with certain elements, like loosening some of the fiscal frameworks. You know, once again, I think we will need to continue to work hand in hand with the EU to make it happen, because without the EU, we will not be able to be sustainably spending 5% GDP on defense. So how to achieve that? 3 elements: political will, capabilities, and cash through partnerships. So there are 3 main partnerships right now. That, and I'm looking a little bit at the report that MEP Szczerba will be writing. And I think apart from geographical elements, there are like 3 distinguished partners that we need to look at. First is industry, or private sector per se. It doesn't have to be industry per se. It can be also startups, so emerging tech. We will need to learn once again how to do business with private industry and private entities in a way, but in a way that is also mutually reassuring, that the private sector also understands our needs. So those needs need to be very clearly and transparently explained to the private sector, to the business, because private sector knows the money is coming. I mean, 5% GDP on defense has been announced. So they will be exactly looking at the per unit price, which in the end, I think in order to make sure that we are also fair vis-a-vis our publics, we need to make sure it's rather a lower one than a higher one. Second element, when we think about, but it's also, you know, those are big businesses. We need to also work very closely with smaller SMEs, startups, techs, deep tech industry, which is a key component in protecting and preserving our technological edge. That's why I just want to make sure that we also highlight that. It's important that we think out of the box when it comes to financing. Some new ideas are out there: the European Rearmament Bank, the Defense, Security and Resilience Banks. There are also concepts that were led by the Polish presidency. We will need to look into that, and as a way of mobilizing private industry, banks, financial sector, to lower the burden on our societies. Second part, our societies. You cannot spend 5% GDP without having a clear societal backing. If your mother or grandmother is not supporting 5% GDP on defense, you are in a big problem. Because in the end, and once again, that's a key role for parliaments to make sure that our societies understand why we are doing it. And there will be two components important to do that. First is people will need to see there is a clear economic benefit coming back to European economies and European industries, and that's something that we can discuss. Second, people need to understand where's the threat coming from. If the threat is wishy-washy, it's like, maybe it's that, maybe it's this, maybe Russia, maybe not. People need to understand why 5%. It's a huge increase that you also need to conceptually frame in a way that people in the streets understand why they are asked to spend much more than in the past. My third point is NATO-EU. It has been a very, it's my personal opinion, but I'll share it with you. It's a very disappointing relationship when you sit on both sides. I think we know why it's disappointing. We know where the stumbling blocks. But I think when you look what has been happening in the last 3 years, what the EU has done on defense, security, and where NATO is currently going, I think we need a new framework for our cooperation. And I'm calling for a new Berlin Plus agreement for both organizations that should go beyond the actual agreement from over 20 years ago. It doesn't really make sense that those two organizations cannot work hand in hand, like actually on making defense something much more understandable to our public. And I stop here, so I'm marching for me long.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Very, very good points. And I will just follow up with one or two questions and then open to the floor, because you've raised some important issues. And just picking up on the last one, you mentioned that a potentially new agreement between NATO and EU could be required, or that the time is ripe. And do you think that the fact that we're advancing now the strategic defense and security partnerships within the EU, and that this framework has been built up by the Compass, could allow to look at this opening? And I'm thinking also about this in the context of a potential partnership between the EU and US, because if you have those two building blocks coming together, well, then maybe we're moving towards a better working framework without the pitfalls that we've been seeing. So if you could comment on that, and I'd also welcome other colleagues to comment, including Elena, who's also with us here.
Look, it's very difficult to say when exactly is the right time to do it. And because I think everyone is saying that was also the problem around the NATO summit. Oh, we need to be careful with the US. I mean, everyone is so careful about, not making the US, the relationship with the US more hostile as it is. We need to, as Europeans, we need to be ready. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to have our own vision of how to frame the relationship with NATO. It cannot be only NATO's role to shape that relationship. I think we have all the necessary instruments, including right now the instruments on deterrence and defense and capabilities in hand. So this is, I would say, this is the moment where we could frame our vision of that potential future framework in such a way that is beneficial to Europeans, without, of course, excluding other European nations, including the delicate relationship that we will need to tackle between EU and Turkey. But we should be in the driving seat to achieve that. And I'm not so worried about the outcome with the United States. I think it's a manageable experience from what I have seen in both terms of Donald Trump and NATO.
Any final comments before you go? Gunther?
Well, I mean, so perhaps let me just add one word on the financing, because you mentioned it, and I mean, that's basically my bread and butter, being an economist, having worked on all these financing schemes for decades. I mean, I think the first point I really want to make is that the Stability and Growth Pact laxening of the rules and sort of allowing more national borrowing is, while in principle being helpful, in particular to let the big country Germany go more into debt, which Germany is now gonna do. And there are limits actually how far Germany can go under the European fiscal rules. I mean, but even let's suppose Germany is doing it and Germany has the fiscal space doing it, that doesn't mean that the other countries have it, right? And so I personally think, if I can be very frank here, the 3.5 plus 1.5 to 5% will be extremely difficult to achieve in significant parts of the European Union, right? I mean, from France to Italy, etc. I mean, that requires, if you really want to reach these 5%, it requires not that, it requires a massive reprioritization of government spending or taxation policy, right? And I mean, that debate, I don't think we are seeing it. And I frankly think it's going to be extremely difficult to get there. And so then, yes, there is a bit of scope for European funding. I mean, we can debate the European budget, of course, and have sort of a different type of European budget. But suppose that doesn't get us much, then there is a little bit of scope for European debt, right? And now that European debt is not going to do the trick on everything, but I do think European debt can help us fund strategic enablers, European strategic enablers. I mean, from satellites to airlift to intelligence. I mean, European debt could be raised to actually fund these assets and probably even own these assets at the European level, right? I mean, so satellites are being owned at the moment already by the European Commission, right? As you know, the Galileo satellites are owned by the European Union. So I think there's more scope to go in this direction. There could be either a mechanism through the European Next Generation EU funds, or what I personally also think can be pursued is some new mechanisms such as the European Defense Mechanism, which we presented at the informal meeting of EU finance ministers in Warsaw. It's a bit like the rearmament bank, but we didn't call it bank, it's mechanism. So there's some differences. We can talk about them at a later stage if you are interested. But I think the funding issue is really critical, and the EU can play some role for the European assets. But at the end of the day, some countries in Europe, if they really want to go for 5%, they really have hard budget constraints, and that means they need to decide to spend on something else less, and that's going to be very painful. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you very much for your remarks, and we will certainly follow up on those financing mechanisms as well. Thank you. Let me jump with a follow-up question about, we talked a little bit about Turkey here, and this is a specific example also being a little bit of a barrier when it comes to, of course, EU and NATO collaboration, but also Turkey could potentially, being an accession country, which is a backdoor, also sign a strategic defense partnership, defense and security partnership. Is this an opportunity also for the EU to move to a new direction with NATO and open up? What do you think?
Thanks for the question. Just to emphasize before I start, I'm really not a Turkey expert, but yeah, definitely. I mean, with Turkey, of course, I think that is something that Elena mentioned before. What would be quite interesting is, of course, the production costs in Turkey would be much, much lower, and they'll have an interest in that as well. So there might be an opportunity here, but of course, I mean, the Turkey-EU relationship is very difficult due to other issues. On the EU-NATO issue more broadly, I mean, I do agree with previous speakers, of course, that there should be some sort of new agreement. But the issue here is that the main things that hampered the cooperation before are still there. What is very often forgotten is that you have 4 EU member states, of course, that are not NATO member states, that have completely different a completely different framework that are neutral. And me being Austrian, there's also the perspective of the neutral countries, which very often are for more defense integration in the EU, but sort of strictly due to sometimes not necessarily due to political reasons, maybe let's put it that way, do not in any way want to integrate further with NATO. They want to make it clear, at least that's in the Austrian case, a clear delineation, not only because, I mean, that is also a constitutional issue, of course, because neutral countries in most cases cannot join military alliances, but it's also, every country has its own sort of like national political framework. And there's also this issue. So there's, when it comes to EU-NATO cooperation, there's always the problem not only on the NATO side that you have the Turkey-Cyprus issue, of course, but also on the EU side, completely different member states that have different national frameworks. That's something that also needs to be taken into account.
Thank you very much. And I have one or two more questions, but right now I'd like to open up to the room. If there are questions to our experts, please be brief in your question or very brief comment and introduce yourself. I have a hand here from the gentleman.
Hi there. I'm Sebastian, so I represent National Gas in the UK. We operate, we are classified as critical national infrastructure, and we've been participating in quite a lot of the UK government's recent strategies, including the Strategic Defence Review, but also we were one of the few UK members that actually contribute to the EU internal strategy as well. One of the things we've been asking for is to have a lot more focus on maritime security, in particular undersea infrastructure. And one of the things that I wanted to mention as well, but ask, is where is the link between private and public partnerships in here? And not necessarily when it comes to private defense companies, but also all the parts of the economy. So in our case, obviously, given that we ship and transfer quite a lot of gas to the UK, you know, any kind of danger or threat to our infrastructure is a direct danger to the nation. And therefore, it also has an impact to any kind of defense plans that a country would have. So I think it is important to make sure that that is included. And in terms of the implementation, to allow industry to also participate in the sort of political games that are happening when it comes to implementing these SDPs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another, yes, question here. We'll take two or three together and then.
Hello, my name is Piotr Rodewald. I'm a trainee, so I'm representing maybe a wider public here. And actually, I'm interested in more political question. It seems that there is alignment in defense policies, and at least we've got the joint procurement in the future. So my question is, are we crossing Rubicon to some extent, or do you see it as a temporary? I don't want to mention the F word, federalism, and because we've got more and more maybe governments that are populistic and nationalistic, but how do you see it? Is it like a long term, or is it just as long as the threat is there? But that probably means as well long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes.
So thank you again. I have two very short questions. How this EU defense mechanism is working? You give money to the government give money to the military industry. Where is the private company here? I don't see it. And second one is a very interesting one. It's do you have a defense strategy against a lot of number of drones which are using AI, artificial intelligence? We are programmed to attack military points in EU countries. I don't know until now a defense method against these drones. And eventually, if you have some project with the Ukrainian military, they have a very good development in the drone industry.
Thank you very much. Excellent questions. So let's perhaps go maybe with partnerships, public-private partnerships, maritime security. Sebastian, we can start. Maybe Dominic, we can take on the drones questions and the defense mechanisms for the EU. And yeah, we'll also then go to the procurement side.
Public-private partnerships definitely very important, especially I've once actually looked at the structure, the ownership structure of the different defense companies in Europe, and especially when it comes to maritime security, these are mostly sort of state-owned or half state-owned and half private-owned. So there's ample opportunity here in a way, right? Because I think, I don't know how it is in the UK, but it's probably the same. I've just looked at the EU ones, Navantia, Naval Group, and these sort of outfits. So, I mean, it both benefits national defense, but also private companies when it is invested in that sort of area. Joint procurement was, yeah. So I personally do see movement here. That wasn't the case before with these new EU programs such as EDIRPA in terms of joint procurement. Now EDIP and SAFE, that is definitely unprecedented. And I think it's also not just because of the situation, but I think there's not going to be a lot of course, there's an additional hassle when you cooperate on procurement, but due to economies of scale, it is rather easy to convince convince the public, but also different political directions, et cetera, that you want to save money, right? Actually, colleagues of mine have done a quite interesting study on how much money one could actually save if you were just to procure together. This is not just good for interoperability, but it's in general just makes plain economic sense. I can't remember which colleague mentioned this, but at the moment we just pay way more than the US for each capability. But there's definitely, I think this should be the #1 priority actually on what we should focus on, because I don't think that it's very controversial, to be honest. If we procure 250 tanks, it's going to be cheaper than 10 as a small country. That is, already happening, and I think there's definitely, especially with SAFE now, SAFE being especially interesting because the UK is involved. What is a huge problem, in my opinion, is that the UK is, for obvious reasons, left out of most programs, even though the UK has a defense industry that is about, in terms of revenue, half as large as the whole of the EU defense industry. And there's already huge connections between the individual companies, the big ones such as BAE and others, with the companies on the continent. So there's definitely a more room for cooperation here. And do you want me to take the drone one as well? Or
well, yes, please, if you want, but Dominic can also add to that.
As far as I'm aware, I think I remember seeing something on the PESCO perhaps having some project that does deal with this. I mean, it would be, in terms of drone swarms, that would be electronic warfare, jamming. That's how what has happened in Ukraine, which has become a battle lab. So you had the drones were being jammed by the Russians. So then the Ukrainians innovated and started with I think what they're called these fiber optic ones. So they're not, so they are unable to be jammed. So there is some development here, but of course I understand the criticism that these things are not really moving at the right pace. And it's also, there's definitely a lot that we can learn from Ukraine here. I mean, even the Americans now, the defense secretary has said we need to, innovation is happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. So that's why initiatives such as the one I mentioned before, the Build with Ukraine initiative, are actually quite interesting because they are definitely the biggest innovators at the moment, are the Ukrainians, that are basically just, I mean, they find solutions as they go because now the drones are being jammed, so they find some other way to use drones, and this is where the innovation happens because it's a necessity.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, asking Dominic, also the drones, but if you also expand that, looking at more broadly aerial defenses of Europe and how partnerships here can play a role.
So two elements here. First one, our airspace is the least protected part of our territory. So I think we need to also understand that if you look at how the war is being waged by Russia, and it's currently being primarily waged through air attacks, our airspace is less protected in Europe. So that's one. So by definition, the first lesson is we need to invest more in air defense systems. And I think Secretary General Rutte, basically in one of his speeches like 2 weeks ago, he basically gave a number which we can use because it's currently unclassified. We are lacking 400% of capabilities to defend. 400%. Those are the gaps. That are the gaps for, of course, NATO planning, but it gives you a kind of an understanding of how much we need. Parts of that, of course, are the big air defense systems. I would probably say when we look into electronic warfare elements, which are important to also protect against the swarms of drones, the gap will be comparable. So that's one. Second element, working with Ukraine. Absolutely critical. We are doing that in NATO through the Joint Analysis Training and Education Center, which is being based in Poland in Bydgoszcz. So this is a first joint ever NATO Ukraine institution where we look into how Ukrainians are using some of their components. Of course, in all frankness, Ukrainians are doing it on the battlefield every single day. So they are not bringing all the knowledge that we would like to get to that specific place. But I think there is at least a framework through which we can work on those lessons learned, including on how the drones are being used both by the Russians and by the Ukrainians. A key component to that is production in Ukraine. You cannot, I mean, the numbers that we will need to develop in order to reach the targets, capability targets, we will need to scale up our production. And in order to help Ukraine win that war, we'll also need to do it in Ukraine. And that will help us also to be more innovative, thanks to working very closely with people on the battlefield who are in fact, working in those factories. And some of the European companies are currently operating already in Ukraine. Can I say final thing on undersea infrastructure? It's very interesting that you've mentioned that, because when I was sitting in NATO, it was exactly the other way around. It's like we discovered that there is a private sector somewhere out there who is operating those undersea infrastructure elements, cables, pipelines, and we do not have an established cooperation with them. So when, of course, Nord Stream 2 happened, we started to gear up and started all the processes we called, what we currently call the critical undersea infrastructure network, where we have both the operational part with our Coast Guards and our naval forces, and the strategic, where we have also the companies that are supposed to be there. But just to give you an example, I remember when I was talking to private industry in some of the allied countries, and they told us, oh, NATO can help us? I'm like, yes, it can. But then we also need to understand how you are protecting that part of, let's say, undersea infrastructure. Let's call it Baltic pipe. That was one of the elements that we discussed. And of course, sensitive element is that both sides will need to share, let's call them classified data, to a degree that they are able to do it and willing to do it. And I think that's the key operational element. But I think it's a critical part. So undersea infrastructure protection, CivMil, starting to happen. We need to do more. But without that, without working with the civilian sector, we will not be able to protect those pipelines.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and also touching on a very important point raised here about intelligence sharing and making progress between allies, partners, and also the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be coming to the conclusion of our session, so I would now like to ask our chair, the rapporteur, to present our concluding remarks. Michał, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As we bring today's seminar to a close, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all our distinguished speakers, panelists, and participants for your valuable contributions throughout the day. Thank you for your in-depth analysis and recommendations. You have provided rich insight into both the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for the EU security and defense partnership. Several messages have been clear. Strengthening the EU-NATO cooperation and partnership, a need to tailor the EU-US partnership. What Dominik Jankowski said, absolutely critical, the EU-Ukraine partnership we have to work on, also to involve Ukraine into our new defense initiatives and programs, and also defense industry cooperation. So today's discussions marks an initial step in the consultative process. It's based on the EPP level. We'll come to the SEDE committee level, and I will announce some ideas I would like to propose to you. The inputs gathered will directly inform the development of the upcoming European Parliament report on the EU security and defense partnerships. And I would like to cooperate with you, and because of your expertise, perspective, and recommendations are key to shaping a report that is both evidence-based and forward-looking. Furthermore, today's exchange will serve as a foundation for a deeper, more targeted consultations with experts and stakeholders, including those from candidate countries in the months to come. The goal is to ensure that the European Parliament's recommendations outlined in the report reflect not only institutional priorities, but also represent a comprehensive set of policy objectives and advancing the EU strategic interests in alignment with those of our partners. To that end, I'm pleased to share that we are planning follow-up consultations and events in the fall. A conference in September, bringing together representatives from the countries and regions most directly involved in the EU's evolving security and defense partnership. An expert consultative process with broad outreach for advisory input and comments to support the report and the further implementation of EU security and defense partnership. And finally, the SEDE committee public hearing, which will further open the space for dialogue, transparency, and key political input into the report. Details of these events will be communicated shortly. Finally, I want to emphasize that we count on all those present today to remain actively involved in the consultation process moving forward. Your continued engagement will be essential as we refine our policy recommendations and advance the EU strategic agenda in the critical domain. And thank you once again for your participation, and we look forward to continuing this important work together. I would like to thank Marcin, our leading expert and senior advisor on EU defense and security, who will cooperate with us. I would like to thank my team, my staff, APAS and trainee team, and also thank our EPP team colleagues, our advisors, and also I'm looking at our SEDE committee administrator. You are with us. After collecting these recommendations, we'll start working on the report, which will be officially, formally presented by me as a reporter of the SEDE committee. So thank you very much for coming, and have a wonderful Monday. And we have started with this beautiful seminar, and we are not finishing. We are just beginning. Thank you.